Well, thank you, everyone, for having me today to talk about Connecticut Research. I was a little surprised, but I guess not really by the poll results. Looked like 80% or more of the people in the audience have English roots, and most of the people have roots in Connecticut 1799 or earlier, which that makes sense because, the older your roots, the more likely, it spreads out across the country. That makes sense. Well, let's get started talking a little bit about Connecticut. Today I'd like to give you an introduction to researching in the state of Connecticut. For many genealogists, the state of Connecticut looks like this. Or, just let me point out before I go on, Samuel Clemens in the middle there in that city directory clip. Or perhaps it looks like this to genealogists. But for those who've lived in Connecticut or have visited, the state looks more like this. It's my goal today to try to combine the two. I'd like to give you an overview of the records that you will need to research your Connecticut ancestors, but at the same time, I'd like to give you a sense of what the state is like and some perhaps not so obvious considerations that will help you in your research, such as geography, which I wrote a blog post about that recently, so if you saw that, you got a little advance on that. For me, Connecticut is a state of living history. Perhaps more than any other state in New England, history is present in our daily lives. For example, I grew up in the ancient, by American standards, town of Glastonbury, Connecticut, which was first settled around 1649 and then incorporated from Wethersfield in 1693. I grew up surrounded by history. The Green Cemetery in Glastonbury is bounded along one side by the town common, which remains a vital and active place. On any given day, you will find people playing Frisbee, having lunch. Occasionally, there might be an arts and crafts fair there. No matter what the activity, Green Cemetery is a constant, visible reminder of our connection to Connecticut's past. Likewise, Glastonbury is a town of historic houses. There are more than 430 houses built in the 1800s, still standing. Another 154 houses were built before 1800 that still stand. They act as a daily thread connecting the past to the present. And one last example is the random appearance of Fieldstone Walls that are commonly seen from highways, in forests, and in neighborhoods, reminding us that Connecticut was once open farmland. So it's hard to get away from history in Connecticut because it's still very much present. One of the unique aspects of Connecticut is its lengthy history. For those of you listening to this talk, some of you may have ancestors dating all the way back to the mid-1600s in Connecticut. Some of you may have had ancestors that passed through Connecticut in the 1700s and 1800s, only staying for a generation or two, and that's actually what my ancestors did. Others of you may have Irish ancestors that arrived in the mid-1800s, and yet others may have Polish or Italian ancestors that arrived in the 1900s. It's important to remember that everyone's research needs are different. You'll need to research in the time period and the geographic regions that are appropriate for your ancestors. So keep in mind that today's presentation is an overview of almost 400 years of history. Here's our basic roadmap for what we're going to cover in the next hour. First, we'll need to discuss access and archives. I'm going to presume that most of you will be doing distance research with very limited access to researching in person. I don't know if that's true, but that's the presumption I'm going to make. But if you do decide to do research in person, there is a quirky rule in Connecticut that you need to know about. Then I'll give you an overview of some of the major record groups available, and I'll follow that up with some specific details regarding neighboring states, migration, immigration, and African Americans. Let's start with access to records. Connecticut has a reputation for excellence in preservation. I'm always astounded when I walk into the town halls in Connecticut and access their vital record books. I am green with envy at the materials that they have to preserve their books and in what good order that everything is kept in. In Massachusetts, I find it's not the case. We're a bit more ragtag up here. So Connecticut is really excellent in the efforts that they have put into preserving their history. And it's also one of the most centralized states in terms of genealogical and historical records. Numerous statewide indexes have been created to help genealogists in their research. Yet because not everything has been digitized and made available online, it sometimes seems that Connecticut is not particularly accessible. I don't know if other people feel that way, but sometimes it's not right to feel this way, but sometimes if I go online and I just can't find the records, I feel like there's a bit of a wall holding me back. And especially when compared to other states, such as Massachusetts, where so much is readily available online. I guess I'm admitting that I'm a bit spoiled over here, and I wish that there was just that much for Connecticut as well. Most Connecticut genealogical records you should be able to access via microfilm or online. With predominantly, it's going to be microfilm. Most Connecticut records have been microfilmed, but they have not been digitized and placed online. So you will find some records online, but if you're researching at a distance, you're going to be using a lot of microfilm. When that's not possible to use either of those, you're going to have to decide whether to make a trip to the state in person or to hire a researcher to do the work for you. And by the way, the Connecticut State Library website has a list of researchers who are familiar with the resources there. So if you ever do need to have somebody on the ground for you in Connecticut, there's a list that you can go to so you don't have to feel like you're taking a shot in the dark. Connecticut has a unique law regarding access to town and city records. Connecticut requires genealogical researchers to be identified with a blue research genealogist card. That's the card you see on the screen. Researchers can obtain this card through membership in certain authorized societies within the state. Without the card, you will not be able to gain access to the records located at Town Hall. So make sure you plan ahead and join a society with plenty of lead time so that you can receive your card before you leave on a trip. A link to the list of participating societies is on your handout, and I'll probably be saying that a lot during this talk. I have tried to put all the URLs on the handout so that afterwards you can go find it there. Hopefully a number of you are familiar with these blue cards, but it's a really important thing for those of you who aren't familiar with it to know so that you're not caught off guard if you decide to come to the state. The next thing that's key to understand about Connecticut research is the archives, where you're going to do much of your work. As I had mentioned before, Connecticut is known for having centralized resources. And this picture here is of the Connecticut State Library. Well, the library's in the basement, but it's the courthouse. And this is one of the reasons why Connecticut is so centralized, because the leadership of the Connecticut State Library over the last 100 years have gone to great effort to initiate these projects to index major record groups, and we're going to be talking about those today. So one of the treats about researching Connecticut, if you can do it in person, is actually going to the Connecticut State Library. You can do so much there in one location that you can't do that in other states. You certainly can't do that easily in Massachusetts, where everything's divided up at the county level or in various archives. But if you can get yourself to the Connecticut State Library, you can do a tremendous amount of research on your Connecticut lines. Now, not too far away is the Connecticut Historical Society. It's only about a 5 or 10 minute drive, depending on the traffic, from the State Library. And both of these are located in the capital of Connecticut in Hartford. And then another place for you to research, another important archive, is the Godfrey Memorial Library in Middletown. And Middletown's probably in just 20 minutes down the road. So within half an hour, you have access to the 3 most important archives in Connecticut. If you're researching from a distance, you're not going to be able to just drop in on those buildings. But that's okay. There's a lot of resources available to you online. The Connecticut State Library is a great resource in person, but it is also a tremendous resource online. The Connecticut State Library has gone to the trouble of creating many guidance documents, and they have put those up on their website, and you can access that online. And when you get stuck and you're not sure where to go with your Connecticut research, go to the Connecticut State Library website and follow their menu and drill your way down, and you will probably find the answers to what you're looking for. Another really good portal is the Family Search Wiki, and I'm not sure how many of you have heard about this one, but this is a fairly new initiative by Family Search. Previously, they used to have research guides, and you could get those research guides either as PDFs on the Family Search website, or you could purchase them at local family history centers. And so what they've done is they've kind of changed with technology, and they've put all that information into a wiki. And you go to the wiki, and you can enter just into a section for Connecticut, and you'll have a menu there with all the different types of record groups and everything, and it's just like their old research guides, except that it's, you just click through it instead of a PDF, and you can find all the information that you need to help create a research plan so you know what steps to take next in your research. Another important portal, again, one of the physical archives, is the Connecticut Historical Society website. They also have guidance documents for their collections, and it's a very informative site for you to use and get familiar with. So don't feel like you don't have as much access because you're at a distance. You have tremendous resources. You just need to go to these websites and explore, and it'll set you on your way. So your third method of access is going to be microfilm, and this is what you're going to use an awful lot with researching Connecticut. But the great thing about this is that there is so much that is on microfilm for Connecticut. So for those of you who like to use microfilm, this is going to be great. You're not going to feel restricted. I don't like using microfilm as much. I like to go to town halls. I like to look at the original documents. And that's harder because you have to drive to do that. But when you can't, it's nice to have that microfilm available. Now, there is microfilm located at the Connecticut State Library, and again, that's one of the reasons why it's such a great place to research, because you can go to that one location, and not only will you use their records, but they have microfilm from other locations available as well. There are large collections of microfilm in other locations, such as the New England Historic Genealogical Society in Boston, and of course, there are major libraries across the United States and in other countries where they might have access to these films as well. The only drawback with microfilm is that, if the center doesn't have the microfilm you're looking for, then you have to wait for them to arrive, and that's always tough. All right, so let's get started talking about some of the record groups that are going to be important for you to consider in your research. And I'm going to try and be as specific as possible without being overly specific so that it takes too long for, to get through the talk. Now, I'm starting with census records, and the reason I'm doing that is because typically you arrive at a new state. When you look at a census record and you see that maybe your ancestor was born in that particular state, or maybe their parent, you don't see their parent listed, but you know how it gives the location for the mother and father, and suddenly you see Connecticut for the first time, and all of a sudden now you're going to research in a new place. And so that's why I start with the census records. I'm assuming that most of you are already fairly familiar with the census records. The U.S. federal census population schedules, are easily accessible on subscription sites like Ancestry.com. They are also available in a limited capacity right now for free.